Good day, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A podcast. It is me, Blake, and Doug here. Kyle is away.
You're so nice. I literally said before we went on, I said, if you're going to throw Kyle under the bus, throw him under the bus, and don't do this half-hearted, then be nice. And so you just went nice.
Yeah, I just went nice. You told me I couldn't be half-hearted.
Come on, man. We throw you under the bus all the time. All the time we throw you under the bus.
I know. I got nothing today for Kyle. I haven't even really thought about that yet.
You don't have to think about it, just whatever comes out. Like you could say this, we're here because Kyle's slacking off and just kind of gallivant, do whatever it is that he wanted to do today. But we're actually going to go on a 2-week hiatus after this.
Yes.
Because Kyle's going to be goofing off for so long. So we just are going to be needing to keep the church running, and we need to go on a 2-week hiatus because Kyle is slacking off so much. See, that's how you throw someone under the bus.
That was good. That was really good.
Because I'm going away next week too, and that's why we're going on a 2-week hiatus. But we'll totally throw Kyle under the bus. So you
I'll
are
be here holding the whole thing.
You are the most.
You're
the most kind person, and I harass you about this. I've said this to you for almost as long as I've known you. You're just too nice.
If that is the worst thing that someone says about me, I am feeling pretty good. I watched Mr. Rogers this week. Have you seen that?
Of course you did.
Do you know that this may seem weird to people, but I've never seen Mr. Rogers, the TV show, ever. I don't know how I missed it. I've never seen that show.
Maybe you're too old. Because I don't remember seeing it when I grew up.
Yeah, like Erin, my wife, she loved it. Like she wanted to see that.
Because you're not that much different than
only 2 years. Yeah, she loved it. I was like, I don't know why, but I've never seen it. But the movie, I loved it, and he was definitely accused of being too nice. So I'll be Mr. Rogers today.
All right, you're here with Doug and Mr. Rogers for the Q&A podcast. I don't know how lively the debate will be.
Well, it might be hard to be Mr. Rogers on this first question. I'll say that as a setup as we transition here to something
Look at you with the segue, though. You may be nice, but you get the segues.
Get the segues, all right. So this question says this. I'm angry. So I'm hoping this comes out in a way that makes sense. Why do such a large number of Christians buy into this anti-vax stuff? This week alone, I've seen members of our own church posting that they are attending hospital protests, attending the freedom rallies, calling themselves purebloods. How can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting lives at risk, when you're actively ignoring Jesus and his teaching? And with these people doing all of this, how in the world are we supposed to feel safe coming into church with the people who are engaging in this behavior?
Wow, there's a lot to that question.
Yep.
And I said to you before we started, I don't know if we're going to get past this question in all honesty, because I want to give this question the answer that it deserves. Yep. And there's a lot here, and there's a lot of layers to this. And so I want to begin by just saying thank you to this person who's expressing honestly how they're feeling.
Yep.
And I don't know everybody who's listening to this podcast and whether you are vaccinated or whether you are anti-vax or where you would land on the whole spectrum of COVID and COVID-related political issues that have arisen. As a church, we have tried to just point people to Jesus. That's been our goal through this whole thing. Instead of, my hope has always been to not tell people what to think, but to try to teach them how to think. Yeah. And I have hoped to do that during this whole period of COVID, to just explain and share the message of Jesus, the wisdom of Jesus, and then allow people to reach their own conclusions. So I'm going to endeavor to do that, but at the same time, I guess we do need to answer this question because we said we would. And so if some of the answers that we're giving offend you, I'm going to just apologize up front. We're just trying to answer this question, and I'm going to answer it as best from my perspective as I can, and Blake will answer it from best his perspective as he can, and maybe we will agree, maybe we will disagree. But one thing that we have tried to always do on this podcast is model for everyone who watches it the ability to disagree and maintain unity. Because we are losing that in our world.
Oh yeah.
We have lost that in our world is probably a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
We have reached this point where anybody you disagree with, You cut out and you say, that's it, relationship's over. But the Bible talks about we need to maintain unity of spirit and purpose, not unity in agreement of all our doctrine or points of view or opinions on things. We're supposed to maintain unity in spirit and purpose. That's in Philippians. And the reason why I think Paul writes unity in spirit and purpose is because there's going to be lots of things that we're going to see differently in the world. And so I'm not saying that my position is how everyone needs to see, but I would hope that all of our thoughts, we are taking time to submit to Christ and to allow Him to challenge them. And I talked about that on the live stream last weekend, that we need to intentionally allow Christ to challenge our perspective on things. Because if we don't, we fall into that warning where Jesus talked about, or we have the potential of falling onto the wrong side of the warning Jesus talked about in the Sermon on the Mount that we talked about last weekend, where Jesus says, if the eye is bad, your whole body is full of darkness. Yeah. And how that really is related to our perspective on things. And if you want to hear more about that, listen to the sermon last weekend on our online teaching. I'm not going to get into it all right now. But I think we all need to be willing to allow Christ to challenge our perspective on things. And so I'm hoping that this will maybe challenge everyone's perspective on things. But at the same time, we're going to share from our perspective, and I want to begin by saying this is our perspective, because the Bible doesn't address COVID. The Bible doesn't address vaccines. Jesus never addressed COVID, and Jesus never addressed vaccines. So we need to learn how to take the heart of Christ that's displayed in Christ and that we're called to be cultivating and apply that to every situation that we face. Yeah. And I think, although we'll maybe get to the later questions, that's where some of the tension for where this person is. So, beginning with I'm angry. Do you have anything you want to add by way of a preamble?
So yeah.
Okay. I'm angry. I can totally appreciate that and totally understand that. And I hope that even in that sense of anger that you're feeling, that you are inviting God into what you're going through and all that you're feeling right now, and that you are being willing to surrender even that anger, and being willing to let Christ speak to you in that anger. Because if there's something that God wants to do in your life through that, if there's something He wants to teach you, I think we talk about God works all things for good without really necessarily always believing that. And I'm not accusing the person who asked this question. I'm pointing the finger at myself. That if God works all things for good, even the difficult and the hard things in our lives, we need to be willing to say, Lord, what are you trying to do through this? And so I would just begin by saying, I hope that if that's where you're at and you're angry, that you are able to pray into that and seek God in that and allow God to refine you in that. Because if we don't, anger is a very difficult emotion to handle well. And it's really easy for anger to grow into resentment and bitterness, and then that gets us off the track of following Jesus, which is exactly what this person is saying other people are doing. And I'm not saying they are, they aren't. I'm just simply throwing that out there as a beginner.
I will jump in there because, interestingly, I'm still reading The Patient Ferment. I'm going to finish it this week, so podcast listeners, I guess I get a 2-week break, so I got lots of time to finish
3 weeks, because we are off for 2 weeks after this.
Right.
So the next 2 weeks, there is no podcast. We just want everyone to know that.
But in the book, I was just reading this morning about the kiss of peace that the early church used in the first 200 years.
Okay.
That in their gathering time, they would typically pray, then they'd do this kiss of peace, and then they'd go to the Eucharist or to communion. And from the author in that book, he's saying the kiss of peace would have been an interesting thing, but it was very purposeful because it actually was that. It was this equal ground where we're all equal. We can, have this kiss of peace because we see that.
So also, did everyone kiss everyone?
It depended on the churches. Okay. Some churches were a little more only guys and guys and only girls and girls. Some it was everybody. It just depended on the tradition that whatever church held.
And I think it would be worth saying that they were house churches, so it's not like there were 700 people lining up to kiss 700 people, which would be just crazy.
And I'll leave it at that. But the interesting thing is I'm reading this, is it was also done, the early church leaders were saying this needs to be done because they took Matthew 5:23 to 25 really seriously, that if you go to the offering to present your gift, and if you have anything against your brother, you need to leave your gift there and go away.
Yeah.
So the kiss of peace was the start of this reconciliation, that if you got anything about it against anybody in this house church at the moment, you're doing this kiss of peace, we're good, okay, we can go to the communion table and do communion together.
That's cool.
And I'm thinking, that is really cool. Like, it really does bring tension down in the room. And the author even said, I'm sure there was lots of tensions in the early church just like there is today.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think of this question, and I think, I'm angry, and I could understand being angry on either side of this discussion. But can you imagine if we had to have the kiss of peace before you came to the communion table this week at church, right? Or
Yeah.
that you actually have to somehow get past this anger and understand how we're going to disagree well in
Yes.
this.
And so interestingly enough, in talking to Laura Lee a couple of days ago, she had this really astute observation that she said, one of the byproducts of going into quarantine when we did was that most of life ended up online.
Yeah.
And most of our social interaction ended up online. As a result, it was really easy to push other people away or mute other voices and only begin to hear those people that we agreed with, and only begin to get those in our feed. And I've talked about this multiple times, how your algorithm on Instagram or Facebook, when it's putting things up, it knows what you've read and it puts other things up that are similar to what you've read, because that's how they're going to get you to stay on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you were never seeing people in real life, and all you were doing was, a lot of what people were doing was online, it created this almost tribalism that took place, where so many people were just found this little group of people who think like them, who agree with them, and it was really easy to then just push everybody else aside.
Yeah.
And we have lost, and we are losing as a result of that, even though it was not, I don't think in any way intentional, just a result of what happened. We've lost this ability to engage with people we disagree with and to maintain that unity. So, because yes, and that wouldn't have been easy 2,000 years ago, and it wouldn't be easy today. And not that we're going to say we're going to start kissing everybody in church, but if we had some way of saying, before we took communion, you know, I'm going to say to everyone in this room, I'm good with you.
Yeah.
Wow, that would be a challenging thing.
Right now, especially with this question, for sure, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the end of the question, is how do we feel safe coming into church with people who are engaging in this behavior? Obviously, there is a fraction there. Is that the right word? Faction. How do you say that?
A faction.
A faction. I said fraction.
Well, it's also a fraction because it's a percentage of the whole.
I suppose.
So technically you're not wrong.
Okay, good. It sounded weird when it came out of my mouth, but there's a division there, and yes, how do we bridge that division? That's
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
So that's the first two words, I'm angry, that we
There we
wanted to
go.
address.
We did good on that.
So, so why do such a large number of Christians buy into this anti-vax stuff? So based on that question, I'm going to assume that this person is not anti-vax.
I would agree.
So when we talk about anti-vax, one of the things I would want to say is that it's really easy for us to lump a group of people together as a whole and just call them them.
Mhm.
And we do that all the time as humans, and it's never right. There's not a sense of any group of people is all the same. Where we will draw those lines, that's not all the same. So I have talked to different people who have different opinions on not getting the vaccine for lots of different reasons.
Yeah.
So I just begin with that. But as far as the people who would be furthest into the anti-vax stuff based on their next statement, posting they're attending hospital protests, freedom rallies, and calling themselves purebloods. Why do such a large number of Christians buy into this? I think that's a multifaceted answer. I think there's a lot of different reasons, and there's probably not one that affects everybody. But as I've thought about this, from my perspective, what I think some of the reasons are, I think number one is the mixing, and this started 70 years ago, and if you want to read a really sobering book about it, read Jesus and John Wayne. The mixing of the conservative and the mixing of conservative media or conservative politics and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I think laid the foundation for a lot of this, because what happened was and it really mostly happened in the States, but Canadians have been brought into it, and a lot of Christians have bought into it, because we don't have our own news networks and stuff to the same degree that Americans do. I've talked to many Christians over the years, and especially during COVID, who talk about, my Second Amendment right. And I go, you're Canadian. You don't have a Second Amendment right.
Yeah.
But we've lost even that idea of reconciling that when Americans are talking about American politics, it really doesn't affect us, except indirectly because we're Canadians and we're neighbors to them. But we don't have, when they talk about those Second Amendment rights, that's an American thing. That is not in any way a Canadian thing.
Yeah.
But there was this mixture that took place a long time ago, that as a result, a large number of evangelicals started getting their news from a certain stream of media and distrusting other streams of media.
Yeah.
And as a result, where those streams go and what those streams say is where people go. And a lot of the anti-vax stuff has come from those streams of media that I will say are conservative. I'm not necessarily going to say are Christian, and maybe that's going to get me in trouble with some people. I don't know, but I'm not saying, I don't believe because something is conservative, it is Christian in any way. And I don't believe that if Jesus was here on earth today in physical form, that he would be a conservative or a Republican. I don't agree with that. So I think that that's where really the foundation for what's happened today has laid, is that we have lost in the church, and I'm not just saying in the church, because there are liberals who only follow a different stream of media and refuse to listen to anything outside of that stream. It's again this tribalism that you see happening in society. It is not just in the church.
Yeah.
But you have this. This is where I get my news source, and this is all I listen to. And we don't ever look outside of that to listen to people who would have a different perspective, to even entertain it. And we've demonized the other side. And because we've demonized the other side, anything they say is a lie. So if they're pro-vax, I have to be this. And we have lost the ability, and again, I think it goes down to, we don't do a good job, and I include myself, I think all of us as humans, don't do a good job of learning how to think. We want people to tell us what to think. And that's not a Christian problem, that's a human problem. But the Bible is filled with this principle of gaining wisdom, which would be gaining the ability to learn how to think. And I think that instead we have just been very satisfied with having people tell us what to think. But that divide that happened 70 years ago, started 70, 80 years ago, I think ended up limiting the people that we listen to, that those people that we just listened to became what we trust, and we don't listen to anything outside of that. So when those people are anti-vax, we have to agree with them. I'll let you jump in there.
Yeah, I think you're doing a good job. Kyle told me about a book he read, I don't remember what it was at all, a couple of years ago even, just saying that Christians are more likely to fall into, the author of this book was saying this, fall into conspiracy theory because of the fact that Christianity seems to be such a big conspiracy theory when we talk about that we have a savior, like God became human and then died and rose again. Like these are hard things for a rational or reasonable mind that hasn't grown up in a faith-based growing up, or it's new to them. If you just go to someone on the street and tell them this is what we believe, they might think you're crazy. And so if Christians have already been in this crazy camp, then we can also just jump on other conspiracy theories because we're already okay with being the minority and having this kind of conspiracy thoughts. That was what Kyle told me a couple of years ago. And I remember thinking, that could be true. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it was interesting to think about and go, okay, yes.
I disagree with that. I think, there is good historical evidence for the validity of the Bible. There's good historical evidence for the death and resurrection of Christ.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the case for Christ, you see that there's solid historical evidence. And I don't think Christians are the only ones who believe conspiracy theories.
I guess I can understand what you're saying.
That again is a human thing, not a Christian thing.
Yeah.
That is not Christians, and I don't think there are many Christians who are brilliant thinkers who I just go, you can't say, well, Christians are just gullible and dumb.
No, I guess maybe I could have said that better, and you might agree with this statement had I said Christians are a minority, and so we're used to being in a minority camp, and therefore maybe are okay with being in a minority on other issues. Maybe that's the way to say that.
Okay,
better.
Maybe I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
I would also like to say, though, on a more base level in response to this question, why do such a large number of Christians buy into this anti-vax stuff? How do I say this well? Fear sells. Fear is an effective way of doing things. We are fearful people. We don't like to admit it. We don't like to think about it, but we are naturally people who are constantly afraid. That is why the universal, through the Bible, response whenever God or an angel shows up anywhere pretty much other than Christ in human form begins with, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
We are fearful people. And fear sells. And why do such a large number of Christians buy into that? Because we are fearful people, and that is a fearful message. I was talking to Lorley last night, and we were talking not about this question, but about this fear thing. And I said, you know what? You can grow a really large ministry using fear. You can grow a really large business model using fear. I think some of the news networks that are out there on both sides of the political spectrum, that's what they have sold for as long as they've been in business. It has been, we sell fear because fear keeps people going. And I said to Lorley, like, right now as a church, I feel like if we switch to a fear-based message, we could probably
attract some people.
Yes, and you could get a lot of people and get a lot of money, but that is not the message of Jesus, and that is not what Jesus came to bring. He came to set us free from the fear that had bound us up our whole lives, I believe, which Hebrews talks about. Yeah. And even like if you look at the arrival of Jesus in the first few chapters, you look at the angels talking to Zechariah, talking to Mary, you look at the angels talking to shepherds. Not only did they say do not fear, but they talk about Christ's ministry being this ministry of that Jesus was going to bring to eliminate fear. Even in Zechariah's prophecy at the end of, I think it's Luke 1, one of the key things, and this is a verse that every Christian should memorize and tattoo on their forehead so they see it every time they look in a mirror, is that Jesus came to enable us to serve him without fear.
Yeah.
And I would say that we have not, as Christian people, followed the instruction of 1 John to be made perfect in love, because love drives out fear.
Yeah.
And because we haven't, we are still fearful people. And when we hear this fearful message, and when this fearful message gets out there, it's easily bought into. It's easily something that we can just find ourselves falling in line with, because it makes sense, because we are fearful people.
Well, it's funny because that just adds to the complexity of what's happening here. Because I've met people on both sides who would say they're anti-vax, that I would say...
On both sides of what?
Sorry, I'll explain the both sides. I've met people that are anti-vax who have said that they're scared of injecting something in their body because that could infect them or whatever else. So it's a fear-based decision. I've also met anti-vaxxers who would agree with what you just said about Christ bringing freedom and liberty, and that they do not have to be scared of COVID. They don't need the vaccine because they're not scared. Christ makes them not scared. So it's funny that that's where the both sides are on the same side of the coin. That you have people that are anti-vaxxers because they're scared, and you have people that are anti-vaxxers because they're free and
you have people who are anti-vaxxers who say everybody who's got the vaccine is a slave to fear.
Yes.
Right? And the reality is that you can arrive at different decisions out of fear, and you can arrive out of decisions from a different place than fear.
Oh.
And it's really easy to use fear to control people and to use fear as a weapon to accuse other people.
Yeah.
So if we can't use it to control someone, then the next thing that happens is I use it to accuse those people.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are large entities on both sides of the political spectrum, news organizations, that use fear to control people. And anybody who can't be controlled by them, they begin to use fear as an accusation on the other side. You're just afraid of progress, or you're just afraid of, something else, and we do this all the time. So those are a couple of reasons why I think a large number of Christians buy into the anti-vax thinking on a broad scale. And I want to say that even in answering that, the danger is that we're painting a large number of people with the same brush, which is not valid.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to say at the beginning. I have talked to lots of people who have not gotten vaccinated, and I have heard lots of different reasons for it.
Yeah.
And I have heard some reasons that I went, you know what?
Yeah,
If I was in your shoes, I don't know that I would get vaccinated either.
Yeah.
And I've heard some that have gone, I could not use that as a reason to not get vaccinated myself.
Yeah.
And so the danger in doing that, in answering that way, is that we're painting people with a wide brush, which I don't want to do. But I realize if you are anti-vax and you're listening to this, we've probably already offended you. Maybe you're not listening anymore. But I'm talking in generalities. And I do think that we don't listen to people oftentimes outside of those who we agree with, and we don't realize how much fear controls our life. And I'm not speaking that only of anti-vaxxers. I'll say that of everyone.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast last week with Francis Chan. And Francis Chan was talking about, he met with the Pope and he met with Benny Hinn. No, he didn't meet with the Pope. He met with a group of Catholics. I don't think he met the Pope. But he met with a bunch of Catholics and he met with Benny Hinn. And he grew up, or he trained for ministry at a pretty famous, very conservative, very fundamentalist seminary, and started his first church there, and he's kind of moved out of that realm. And he has been just raked over the coals by the people who school he went to, the people who are part of that fundamentalist, I won't say just denomination, but branch of Christianity. And this person was asking him about, he met with a group of Catholics, and he said, I was invited to go speak to a group of Catholics, and I felt like I should go, so what am I supposed to do, not go? And he said, I went into this meeting with a group of Catholics, and the first thing that happened was that it was Catholic leaders. They came up and they washed his feet, and they were literally weeping, and they were saying, can you please help us, teach us how to better help people follow Jesus? And he said, I sat there, and I'm like, theologically, I know there's some areas that I really disagree with you. But what do you want me to do with this? And he's speaking to those people who were his critics. He's like, what do you want me to do with this? These people clearly love Jesus. Yeah. And then the one person he talked about meeting was Mike Bickle, who runs the International House of Prayer somewhere in Colorado, and how he's not very popular with this fundamentalist group either, because he's pretty charismatic. And he's like, I met with Mike Bickle, and he's like, he loves Jesus. Like, I don't have to agree with everything theologically he has. He genuinely loves Jesus. And he met with Benny Hinn, and he said he talked about the meeting he had with Benny Hinn. And it was just this powerful meeting. And it was and he's like, what do you want me to do? And he's getting killed at the same time by the people that he went to seminary with, because he's even having conversations with people within Christendom. Now, some people would say they're not within Christendom, but I would say within Christendom that he disagrees with.
Yeah.
But he has learned the value of reading and looking at different points of view. And I think we need to find the courage to at least listen to someone on the other side of an opinion, because we don't know that, we really don't know what their point of view is. We know what we've been told their point of view is, but until you actually sit down and talk to them, you don't know. I've talked to Christians in this church who are like, well, Catholics aren't really Christians, and I'm like, when did you become judge?
Mm-hmm.
I wrestle with that. I had a grandmother who was a strong Catholic her whole life, who loved Jesus and prayed and prayed and prayed. And when I went into when she knew I was going into ministry, she was so excited that there was going to be a priest in her family.
Yeah.
And the last time I met with her, when I was just about done Bible college, she said, I pray for you every day. Because this is, like, she was just so excited. And she said, the next time I see you, should I call you Father? And I was like, I think we're good there. I didn't even want to, like, break down the whole idea of that. Okay, I feel like we're way off base. But I think that this whole idea of talking to people outside of our own viewpoint is something we need to do. And we just don't do it enough. And I think that's part of what has caused this movement, because we're not willing to entertain points of view other than ones that that just already agree with or confirm the point that I've accepted.
Yeah.
So this week alone, I've seen members of our own church posting they're attending hospital protests, attending freedom rallies, and calling themselves purebloods.
Maybe I'll speak to this first.
Sure.
And just saying, I think you set the stage there a little bit, like talking about, people who love Jesus. And just as you were saying that, I was thinking of this next part of this question and what people would identify with, or what their identity would be, or what we'd assume about people. And I think, man, I want to be known for the fact that I love Jesus. Like, I hope that's front and center. And I know it's not always, like, I do a lot of hockey stuff, I do other things, so people might, identify me with other things than that. But I hope that's front and center. And I would hope that the people in our church, or people that follow Jesus in general, that would be something they would consider in the decisions they make. Because if there is people going to these hospital protests, or attending freedom rallies, or using the term purebloods, I just think that's a big identity that might not scream Jesus to the general public anyways, right? So I would say there's a caution there. Maybe that's the way I'll start that. There's a caution for all of us as believers. What do we want people to think about us? And then how do we act and behave out of that? So,
and I would just throw out there that the people who attend our church, like the pastors who lead our church, are all people in process. And any one of us, every one of us is wrong on different things every day.
Yeah.
So I would say someone attending a freedom rally, I don't have a problem with that. Somebody with a hospital protest, that hits me a little closer to home, having had a kid who went through cancer and hearing the stories of people trying to go in and having to get through that.
Yeah.
And I'm readily admitting where that hit me was out of my own personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
People calling themselves purebloods.
That one hits me. Just I have a very multi-ethnic family. I don't know if everybody knows that. Yeah. And I think of the things that have gone on in this world in the last couple of years, and I'm just like, that I just can't understand how we would use such a term. Again, if our identity is in Christ, I just don't do that, right? Like, pull back. But again, I think what you're saying here, Doug, and I'm really appreciating the tone that you're using, and I want to be the same way, is how then do we as a church continue to include these people in our church and pull them along to follow Jesus better, right?
And that's the goal.
Because if we just look at something like that, or if I'm offended by purebloods and I write someone off as like, that's it, they're out, then I'm not acting Christ-like anymore.
Yep.
And I'm also cutting them off from becoming more Christ-like. Whereas, can I put my own feelings aside? Can I go, okay, how do I help maybe educate them on this? Or how do I teach them more about Jesus? Or how do I just love them enough that they would want to encounter Jesus more in their life? That needs to be my response.
And that's always the tension in the church. is people go, well, the church should act like Jesus, but the church is also a group of people who are trying to figure out how to act like Jesus.
Yeah.
And we walk in this tension where we realize this is my responsibility to be light like Jesus called me to do. And we talked about that a few weeks ago, you and I, in the Sermon on the Mount series that we did. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. Let your light shine. And we know that, but we also know the rest of the book of Matthew is Jesus teaching his disciples and saying to them, you're not acting like light right now. And so Jesus recognizes people are in process. And so I understand the tension there. And my hope is always that I guess I look at it and I go, what matters more to me is which direction you are headed. Are you growing in your identity, being found in Christ, or is that decreasing and is being found more in other things?
Yeah.
Because I think we need to continually be having our identity be more and more found in Christ, and the things of Christ being more and more important to us, and the other things fading away. The problem is that sometimes we stop, or we get distracted, or we get off track, and we start going off on tangents. And we've tried over the last 19 months now, 20 months, I don't know how long it's been since COVID began, to not really address COVID, but to intentionally point people to Jesus.
Yeah.
Because that's where the answer. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth.
Yeah.
And I talked about this on the weekend as well. Jesus said, I am the truth. You want to know truth? Get to know Jesus. Turn off your news network. Turn off your social media. Put all that stuff aside and spend more time in prayer.
Amen.
You will get to know the truth. Not the truth as in what is the answer to COVID, where did it all come from, and what's the solution with vaccines, but the truth as in how is the right way for me to live. We spend way too much time on those other things that are mostly garbage and not nearly enough time allowing our lives to be formed by Jesus.
Yeah.
I will just say that, and I'm including myself and everyone in that. That is not an anti-vax thing. That is not a pro-vax thing. That is a Christian thing.
Well, I think someone said the other day, I don't have permission to tell a story, so I'll just say it like that, that if we are going to stop people from coming in our church because they're too broken, whatever it is, because that's kind of where the next question goes here. How can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting lives at risk? How can you actively ignore Jesus? And how can I go to church and feel safe in this? If we're going to put up a blockade and say these people can't come in our church because they're too broken, which could be, some of these people in this case, at what point could have someone drawn a line and I couldn't have gone into church one day? Yep. Right? Like, there is so much brokenness in my life that I'm very aware of, and probably some that Jesus even wants to disclose to me even more so. Yep. But somebody could have said, no, Blake, when you did such and such, that discluded you from church.
Yep.
At that point, I'm cut off and I don't get the chance to grow in my faith and either repent of those things or understand why they're not good. So I think, again, we need to bring the barriers down and increase the pointing to Jesus to be able to live out the way Jesus wants us to live out.
Well, that brings us into the next part of the question. How can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting lives at risk? And I want to begin very gently by saying let's be careful when we start accusing other people without having walked a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
That we don't know everything, and you can disagree with someone, but at the same time we gotta not get to that point of. And this weekend, I think, is when we're talking about judging.
I was going to say, this whole question.
This weekend's online teaching you need to listen to.
Like, some of it I'm sitting here, I'm being honest. Some of this question, I'm sitting here vibrating. I'm like, this is, like, I want to share my opinion. But I'm like, no, that's not it. The thing is to walk like Jesus. We're going to talk about judging this week. I've already been praying over this passage because I'm like, this is terrible for me. I'm like, I don't know how hypocrite written all over myself as I try and preach this, but that's the deal.
Yep.
Is that we need to love like Jesus loved.
Yes. So I'll just say that to say, but how can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting lives at risk? So I had this interesting experience recently. I was in a group discussion, And there was one person who was a strong anti-vaxxer, and another person who basically, I think, would almost be like mandate vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation became this debate between the two of them.
Right.
And as I sat there, I had this moment of like, well, I see it from a different perspective than I've ever seen it before. The what I thought was the issue below the question. The person who is an anti-vax is very much an individual rights person.
Mm-hmm.
The person who is a mandate vaccines is very much a collective person. This is the tension that we need to live in, is as a democratic society of free individuals.
Yes.
And we have, as a society, gone off track, and we have become a collection of individuals who live in the same country more than a country of people with a corporate identity. Whenever you go off, whenever you stop holding those two things in perfect tension, you fall into problem. If you fall into the group matters more than the individual, that's the road to communism. And we know that communism isn't good.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the result of communism in the Soviet Union. We've seen the result of communism numerous times in not just how it doesn't work societally, but how it leads to the wrong persecution of people and the loss of individual identity and all sorts of abuses. So I'm not advocating for communism. What we in North America have neglected to see is that when you fall off to the other side, you have the disintegration of society.
Yeah.
Which,
anarchy.
Which
basically.
is where, which is where, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but where if nothing changes, we are going as a society in North America. That we will continually fragment into ever smaller factions of people and groups of people and tribes of people. Because you can separate into this group and say, this is our group, but eventually you're going to have a disagreement in that group, and then that group's going to become 2 groups, and then that group's going to become 4 groups, and you're going to have, eventually you're going to be all on your own. And what we have done and I don't mean the church, I mean North American society from my perspective, over the last, again, I would say 60 to 80 years, there's been this heavy emphasis that I see as I look at history. And I'm not that old that I saw it all, but reading and different things like that, even the 60s with the sexual revolution and just the change in thinking and just the direction of society as a whole has been this elevation of individual rights. And it has come to the point now where I think we're tipping over the other way and we're seeing the fragment. And the problem that I see is that we are saying it's either or and not both and.
Mm-hmm.
It is not I'm an individual or I'm a part of a whole, but it has to become I'm an individual who is a part of a whole. And that's the only way that the church will work, and it's the only way that society will work.
Yeah.
And so how can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting lives at risk? I think that this fundamentally begins in the church, because in the church we should understand I am an individual loved by God, a child of God, adopted by God through the work of Christ. God loves me. And I am a part of the body of Christ. And I have been brought into a relationship with other people, and I've been adopted into a giant family who I also have responsibility towards. It is not either or. But when I sit and I've listened to people having this discussion, and it was recently I was listening to people having this conversation, and I was like, basically, you're not seeing that each of you is arguing one half of the whole that we need to hold in tension. And we naturally don't like to hold things in tension.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want that because it's hard to hold something in tension.
Yeah.
Right? It's much easier to go to one extreme or the other. And yet faith is a journey of learning to hold things in tension. How do we hold this in tension? And it's work, and we don't like work. And so how can you claim to be a Christian when you're putting others' lives at risk? I would say that we have in the church so individualized salvation that we have neglected to teach people when you become a Christian, you have a responsibility to the rest of the body because you are a part of the body.
Yeah.
So I think we've created a culture where we allow people to go, well, it's just me and I can do what I want.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be careful on judging. I think we also have to realize that there is individual and there is the group mentality, and we have to learn both of them. And I would guess, I don't know who submitted this question, but I would guess this person falls more on the group side.
Yeah.
And so they're looking at these other people going like, how can you do that? But they're standing as individuals and going, how can you do that? And instead of realizing we need to see both points of views are valid and need to be held in tension, instead of chucking rocks.
I agree. I think you've done a good job. I think we've done a good job. I have thought for years, somewhere that tension hit me just with faith in general, with Christianity. If we're going to live in faith, the whole Bible is written with things that are in tension, and we need to learn how to wrestle them out. And just as you were holding your hands like that, I was just picturing like holding something in tension, right?
Yeah.
Like, you take something, this isn't very tense, but, and then you fold it and you have to hold. That takes an enormous amount of energy to continue to hold something in tension. And yet, I think Jesus was really good at it, and I think he expects us to practice it and figure it out. So,
And this isn't the only thing we've neglected to do. Like, you think about the Calvinism versus Arminianism
totally,
debate
yeah.
that has raged in the church for 500 years
Yeah.
because we can't hold it in tension,
Yeah.
right?
So,
So, yeah. When you're actively ignoring Jesus and his teaching, I would say that Jesus never addressed COVID. Jesus never addressed vaccines. And so you can say that Jesus said we need to love each other. But I would also say that there are a lot of people who are anti-vax for some really poignant, thoughtful reasons that I've gone, I see your point of view. I maybe don't even agree with it, but man, I recognize that. So I would, in this one, I would say, yes, Jesus tells us to take care of each other, and there's a point that you can make that by not getting vaccinated, there's the potential that I could not be taking care of my brother and sister, even if the hospitals get overrun with COVID people who need other surgeries end up getting them neglected. So it could have a domino effect that somebody, because of unvaccinated people being in the hospital because of COVID, they go, well, that's their choice, it doesn't affect other people. But it does impact other people because the hospitals are pushing and delaying all sorts of surgeries, which will have health effects on people who got vaccinated. So I think we've lost that. And I do think that, I'll speak to my point of view, I think that this goes part of being a part of the whole, that we realize that there, I think, will be people who die as a result of this fourth wave of COVID who don't ever get COVID, but just can't get the help that they needed to get because the hospitals were overrun with people without COVID. And I'm not saying you have to get the vaccine or not. I believe that is something that will happen. But again, we need to make sure that we are, we're clear. So Jesus does say love each other. That would be the only teaching that I think we could say we could apply to this. But I have had conversations with people who I go, I hear your reasons, I hear your heart in why you are in this place and you've taken this stance. And as your friend and as your pastor, some people have come to me seeking my advice as pastor, and I've gone, that's really valid. I don't know what, I hear you on that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think they can be loving the group as well. Like, we know a family that's would be anti-vax for some of the reasons that you're describing, but they are purposely then social distancing and doing other things that they feel is good with loving others, if that's the teaching that we're going to.
Yes, and I do think that this question is directed more towards the hardcore anti-vaxxer who says, I want to live my life as I did before COVID without getting the vaccine.
Yeah.
And so, but I just want to also bring in the bigger picture to say that's not everyone.
And if you are on the anti-vaxxing or anything where you stop caring about other people, then yes, you are outside of living the way Jesus has asked you to live.
Yes.
So I guess we can clearly say that.
Yeah.
But that's only if you really don't care about other people.
And with all these people with these people doing all of this, how in the world are we supposed to feel safe coming into church with the people who are engaging in this behavior? I would just say in response to that, our church has, from the beginning of COVID, said we will follow the restrictions that the government has put on us, because we will assume that the government is doing the best that they can do to mitigate this, because they don't want the public health system overrun. And so we will make sure that we are abiding by all of those rules. And as a result, we've seen a lot of people who've left our church because we weren't making some of the decisions that other churches were, and that is what it is. But our goal has been, through this whole thing, to allow a place where everybody who wants to come to church can feel safe. So right now, if you come to church on a weekend, we have masks and social distancing, and we're asking you to register so that we can know that everybody can have a spot and it can be socially distanced. And so the reason that we're doing this is because we want everybody who wants to come to church to be able to feel safe coming into church.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we've done everything the general public has done, so yeah, if you didn't feel safe coming into our church, then you also wouldn't feel safe going into a grocery store or anywhere else. Like, we are doing the same things that the other places are. So.
Well, maybe yes or no, because like a grocery store, you can click and collect,
Yes.
right? So you don't have to go into a grocery store any longer. And a restaurant, they could have the vaccine mandate, or the vaccine passport.
Yeah.
And so you could go into a restaurant knowing that everybody in there is vaccinated. Lori and I, a couple of weeks ago, went out for supper at the Keg. And it was, on a Friday night, it was packed in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a weird feeling at one point. Like, we got there a little early. And it was a little weird because as the place filled up, all of a sudden, basically every table was full.
Yeah.
On a Friday night. And we were like, this is weird. Like, we just hadn't seen that in a long time. But if you have the vaccine passport system in place as a restaurant, you can then fill your restaurant.
Yeah.
And so it was just very different and very weird. As a church, we haven't been given the option.
No.
And so people have asked that question. I think you guys addressed that question last week, and we
Yeah.
haven't even taken time to think about it because we don't have that option. But so what we do is we have followed the guidelines, so that our hope is that you would be able to feel safe coming into church, with knowing that we're doing everything we can to keep you safe. And I will also say this, and maybe this will get me into trouble as well, and maybe I've avoided trouble through this whole thing and now I'll get myself into trouble. I do believe that most of the really, really strong anti-vaxxers are not coming to our church on the weekends.
I agree with that.
I don't know if they're still attending our church, but we have not seen people coming in onto our weekend gatherings and contesting the restrictions we're operating under and that we're asking people to do.
Or causing trouble
Yeah.
or any.
Everybody who comes in is sitting where we're asking them to sit because they recognize we need to maintain social distancing. We have eliminated a bunch of rows in the church so that there's 6 feet of distance between even rows. And we are asking you to register so that we can make sure that we don't overfill.
Yeah.
And so we want you, if you want to come to church, to feel safe coming to church. Absolutely. That is our desire. And so I hope that we've done a good job of answering this question.
Well, we've spent a lot of time on it, so I think we'll just do the one question for today.
We've done a long job of answering the question. I don't know if we've done a good job.
Well, I think we handled it delicately, and I think that was the way it needed to be handled from every perspective, no matter where you are on this spectrum and what you believe right now or what you think. We just want you to live like Jesus, and that's a hard thing because it, again, is going to mean living in that tension. So,
and I think it also means some intentionality, and maybe for everyone who would listen to this, wherever you are on this spectrum, let me just ask this question. Has this become an idol? Has this become something that is more of your attention, more of your focus, more of your identity than Christ? Wherever you are on the spectrum, anything can be an idol. We read the Old Testament where they had gold statues, and we're like, those people were so dumb.
Yeah.
We don't understand that an idol is anything that takes over the place that Christ deserves in our life. Yeah. So when something else becomes our identity, it's an idol. When something else becomes our focus too much, it's an idol. When we're looking to something else for source or comfort more than Christ, that's an idol. So let's everyone, allow Christ to challenge us in this area where he wants to.
Yes.
So we are again hiatus for 2 weeks. We will be back 3 weeks from today.
That's right.
Either Blake or I, or Kyle or I, or Kyle or Blake. If Blake's on, he'll be nice. Kyle or I will throw the other person under the bus. Somehow it'll happen just because we're not as nice as Blake. So over the next 3 weeks, try to live more like Jesus. And if you can't do that, at least try and be more like Blake.
There you go. I like that. All right. See you guys. Have a good week.